Sadly, there's a lot going on in the world at both a political and societal level in respect of commitments to diversity and inclusion. And it's important that we continue to lead in valuing women in leadership, recognising that there is still so much to do. That's why this morning's conversation is so important and coming together to discuss the barriers holding women back in their leadership journey. But more importantly, and which is what we're really focused on, is the solutions and the actions that come out of that. And today, the important thing that we're doing is sharing our stories and our experiences and our resources and looking at how we can learn from each other and leverage from each other's experiences. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot for you to take away today. The fact that this is our second sold-out event, which we're absolutely delighted with, I think emphasises not only the importance of this topic, but the importance of the series. And I think that it's a great credit to both FSC and Infins in allowing Empower Women to lead the bringing together of this collaboration. And I'm sure we're going to do some great things in the future. So today, I would ask for one thing. Actually, I'm actually going to be a bit greedy and ask for two. After you have listened to what I know is going to be an inspiring panelled conversation. From the briefing, I just left the call sort of floating on air with regard to the possibilities of what we can do. But there's two things that I'd like you to think about. Firstly, to think about what's the one thing that you can take back to the office and implement within your organisation. And if you are not a decision maker in your organisation, you are certainly an influencer by being here today. And just so that you know, we did personally invite all of the CEOs in the FSC industry by letter, with Jim and Kirk sending those out for us. So if your leaders haven't been able to join us today, please share the learnings and the impact that this discussion can have on your own organisation and the women within it. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing I'd really ask you is to think about what experience or learning do you have within your organisation that you could actually share with others as we create this sort of collective action around making change for women. So a bit of a job for you to do, but only after you've had the great experience of listening to our inspiring panel.
Honoured to introduce the Right Honourable Nicola Grigg, MP for Selwyn, having entered Parliament in 2020. Minister of State for Trade, Minister for Women, Associate Minister of Agriculture and Minister for ACC. Nicola was born and raised on the family beef and sheep farm in Mount Somers in the heart of mid-Canterbury and studied at New Zealand Broadcasting School, graduating with a degree in Broadcast Communications and diplomas in TV and radio news. Before becoming an MP, Nicola was a portfolio manager at NZTE. She managed the business development of a wide range of Canterbury-based exporters, mostly in agriculture, agri-tech and manufacturing sectors, supporting them to grow their business offshore. Outside of work, Nicola tries to spend as much time as possible outdoors, enjoys skiing, riding, running and hiking, is deeply passionate about promoting New Zealand's agricultural sector and farming, and also, of course, economic empowerment for women and women in leadership. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Nicola.
Morena koutou katoa. Thank you so much for inviting me here this morning. It really is a pleasure to be able to join you for this second session around, women in finance and leadership. Any initiative that supports women's empowerment and leadership development has a really big tick in my box. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank Jim, Kirk, Tracy and Prue for creating this platform for the discussion and indeed I know the learning that is going to come out of it, and more importantly the concrete actions that you're all going to take home with you. And I've already got a piece of homework for you all to take back to your offices that I'll get back to shortly. I'd like to acknowledge all of the other speakers that you're going to hear from today. Thank you for participating and sharing your insights. If anyone's read the bio, it's a pretty formidable lineup, and I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot. The reason it is so good to be here because it just so happens that empowering women economically is my number one priority as Minister for Women. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but not only does it give women more choice, but it does have a ripple effect across families, communities, and indeed the economy. While New Zealand has made significant progress over the years achieving gender equality, I believe, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that there is still work left to do, particularly when it comes to women's participation in the labour market. And that includes lifting women's incomes and indeed addressing the ever-stubborn gender pay gap. The stats don't lie. You're all financial people. You'll understand stats. Women sit higher than men across unemployment, underemployment and underutilisation rates. We also have seen trends that we, women, are typically overrepresented in lower paid roles and jobs perceived as lower skilled. Women also are usually primary caregiver and do more unpaid and often unaccounted for work. You've probably all seen the report that the Retirement Commissioner carried out and released last year, showing that a staggering 36% gap has emerged between men and women regarding their KiwiSaver. And that's just another example of how women are being disadvantaged by working part-time and taking greater care responsibilities. A huge factor, though, in achieving women's economic empowerment is addressing that gender pay gap, and that's what I really want to focus my comments on today. So let's talk about it, because it ain't going to go away without doing anything about it. We know that for the past 10 years or so, it's sat on or around 9%, and it's at about 8.2 at the moment. We know the reasons behind it are complicated. There's a lot of it being, they reckon about 80% is being attributed to unexplained factors, which is sort of like a nice catch-all for unconscious bias in hiring and pay decisions. It makes resolving it challenging, but I don't think impossible. So I'd like to take the opportunity to commend the work that those of you in the room who belong to the council are doing to make driving down this pay gap a key area of your work focus. The Empower Women initiative is really starting to address wage disparities within New Zealand's financial and insurance sectors. It is a bold but necessary piece of work, so thank you. The government, I'm happy to say, is also really focused on doing something about it, and that's exactly why we've developed the first ever government-backed gender pay gap toolkit. It's quite a mouthful. I haven't yet come up with a more pithy name, but I will. Open to options and ideas. And we launched it in November last year. So it's been built by business for business. So we've been taking on the learnings and the feedback from those that have already been recording their pay gap to help other organisations to accelerate their own steps. It helps them calculate the pay gap within the organisation, understand more about why it exists, and then most importantly, it gives them workbooks and tools that they can actually download to be able to start to identify where the sticky points are and how they can start to address them. So I'm currently on a mission. I'm taking this out and about across the country for the rest of the parliamentary term. In fact, we're trying to get into as many regions across New Zealand as possible. I'm speaking to as many of the professional services groups, to all of the chambers of commerce out and about. We started in Queenstown a few weeks ago. I was in Wellington last week, here in Auckland, and then planning on being in Dunedin and Nelson before the end of the month, I think. I can't quite remember what my diary says. But it's getting really good engagement, which is just so exciting. We've had 16,000 visits to the site since November and 900 downloads of that workbook. So that's really positive to me, because it says people are open, they're engaged, and they're ready for this conversation, and more importantly, to take that action, because I think it's going to be a collective, sustained effort that we're all going to need to get involved in to make the lasting change that's necessary. This morning, I want to talk a little bit about women in leadership as well, because we're going to be hearing from Emma, Alison, Mika and Steve about their approaches to recruiting and retaining women and supporting them into leadership. Because the reason I want to talk about this is that the barriers that exist to women's economic empowerment look very similar to the barriers that exist for women moving and elevating up into leadership. And so, unsurprisingly, encouraging women into leadership and governance roles and ensuring that there's a pipeline of opportunity available to support women across the country is my second major priority area for as long as I hold this portfolio. We made some really great gains recently in public sector governance, with just over 50% of board roles being held by women in the last 4 years. And I happen to sit on a cabinet committee that is responsible for appointing the 800 odd roles throughout the year. And so I now give quarterly updates to my colleagues, and those that don't quite meet the 50% threshold get some robust feedback. But we do know that private and not-for-profit governance sectors are doing really well, and huge commendation to those of you in those areas. And many do have commitments to gender equality and supporting women into leadership. But again, the stats don't lie. If you look to the NZX listed companies, there's just 30% of women holding those sorts of roles in that space. So again, a gentle nudge to our friends in the private sector that we've shown that it can be done, so please do it. But we know that some sectors, within private, you can break it down sector by sector, are doing better than others in appointing women into leadership and closing those pay gaps as a result of that. So equally, there are those who have been bold, who've taken a good deep dive, and who have recognised that they do have significant gaps. And so what I'm really pleased to see that is, instead of shying away from it, instead of burying it, they're leaning in, opening themselves up and trying to resolve it. And the electricity sector is a really good example, with all the main providers, including Transpower, Meridian and Powerco, are all working together on a plan to bring their collective gender gap down. And actually, interestingly, when the Ministry for Women first piloted this idea, electricity sector was the first one to stand up and step up and say, we really want to be involved in this. So we're very, very grateful to them for the work they've done. When we started the project, they were reporting their pay gap sitting at around 30%. So really can't wait to see that downward shift. Almost matched by the financial services sector, which I gather is sitting at about 29%. But again, sunlight is the best disinfectant, excuse the pun, because if you look to Westpac, it's one of the organisations in your own sector that's really committed to reducing the gap. And already there are a number of initiatives underway, including that target of reaching a 50-50 split of men and women across their top 3 tiers by next year. So that's not too far away. They've also made changes to their recruiting policies and placed a big focus on promoting flexible working and that 50-50 gender split on all internal leadership programs, as well as enhanced parental leave support, because trust me, that motherhood penalty is a thing, as we're going to hear more about, I'm sure, later on. We know change happens when women are in leadership roles, and including representation at board level. There's a different way of thinking, a different way of approaching things. And there are a lot of businesses across New Zealand's financial sector that have signed up to that Champions for Change collective, which is really committed to impacting changes in their own organisations. They've actually agreed and have reached their target of 40-40-20, and which is a really good result. And so I'm now working with these sorts of championing organisations and alongside the ministry to see how we can extrapolate that model out across the economy, across the private sector. But it is my hope that, together we can demonstrate to other businesses, to other organisations, the value of having more women on their boards and indeed at the leadership table and in those C-level positions. But in order to inspire and guide prospective female leaders, initiatives like mentoring programs and networking events like this really are important. They're very, very genuine activities to take part in. And that, you'll all know the financial services sector has traditionally been a very male-dominated and intensely competitive area. And that does make it difficult for women wanting to get into the field, particularly if they have exited the workforce for a period of time to have children, to raise children. They don't necessarily have the confidence in their own capability to come back in. But by having a really strong focus on gender equality and championing those women into leadership, by shoulder tapping the women around you, you can create that necessary pipeline of future leaders and you can start to tackle the biases that are holding women back, and you can create that meaningful and impactful change. But there also needs to be discussions around gender pay, about the kinds of jobs that women and men do and the way that they are paid and what needs to be done to make things more equal. Again, I refer to the Retirement Commissioner because she is a force of nature. But the National Strategy for Financial Capability provides a plan that does have practical steps for employers, including pay audits, removing biases from recruitment and promotion practices, and creating, of course, clear pathways for career progression. The Gender Pay Gap Toolkit that I just mentioned earlier, it provides a number of practical things that businesses can do, and that was one of my big asks to the ministry when they started that work. It's all very well calculating your gap, but what can business actually do to address it? And so again, we're really grateful for the open and honest feedback that we've been given by people who are leading the way in this space. And so there is now, a context for businesses to be able to put themselves into and apply and move forward. So my big ask of you today, we were told, we're going to give you some homework to take back to your offices, is that you are all influential people, and so please share this resource. It is on the Ministry for Women website. We've made it available through MB as well, but please share it, multiply it out, because as many people that start to take a look at this thing, that start to share it amongst not just their work colleagues, but their social networks and family networks as well. We've made it available. It's there to use, but we've got to, I'm just going to, New Zealand's small enough. I reckon if I can just travel the country up and down for the next 2 years, I'll be able to get in front of 5 odd million people and we'll get the job done. But the other part of my work program is around encouraging the future, the youth of today, to start to ask businesses. And, once I've done my work stream for this year, getting across business and organisations, I'm going to actually start tapping into universities and saying to young women, when you go to enter the workforce, when you are at the point of interview, you can eyeball your future employer and say, what's your pay gap? And ask them if they calculate it, ask them if they publish it, and if not, why not? There is now no reason not to calculate your pay gap. So that's my next ask, because, and I often repeat this anecdote. I, for one, have never in my life asked about a pay gap. I've never asked what my male counterpart was being paid compared to me, and I've never ever asked for a pay rise, to my eternal shame. So I'm hoping the next generation will do better than me. But this morning's event provides a great opportunity for us all to come together, to look one another in the eye, and make a genuine commitment for us all to become champions for progress, for equality, and for change. So thank you to all of my fellow speakers here this morning for sharing the journeys that I know are going to be terribly interesting. We all hold the power to promote the interests of women and to help support them to economic empowerment. And I do genuinely think that through the coordinated approach of business and of government and of community, I genuinely think that we are going to be able to achieve the change that our women need. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, Nicola. And yes, I don't have to tell this room, what gets measured gets managed. So I totally tutoku and support everything that Minister said. Just set the scene a little bit, because we're going to talk to these leaders about leading change that breaks down structural barriers that impact on the retention and advancement of women. And I think we can talk about empowering women, but we actually need to break down barriers, because women are pretty darn awesome and we're just doing a lot. So I'm really grateful to have these leaders up on the stage. We're going to talk through some practical stories around, in their career, what have they found that is useful? And this is important work, right? As we've discussed already, there's much to be proud of in terms of progress, and so many companies are taking positive steps towards greater inclusion, including everyone in the room. You are all here. And there's a long way to go. So both things can be true. I'm not going to read out any stats. We've had stats, but also we know them all, right? Today we want to talk about solutions, and that's what we're going to do. I just have one little scene setter. I saw something yesterday when I was preparing for the panel. Melinda Gates has a venture called Pivotal Ventures. Melinda Gates is just giving away all her money now to help women, which is amazing. She's done some recent research in the States that I wanted to share, and I know it's the States, and I know the States is a different market to us, but they echoed what I see in my work, and I work with hundreds of working parents, mums and dads. They looked at the main barriers for women for advancing at work, and I thought I'd share the top two. The first barrier was inflexible workplaces. 1/3 of women said that the hours required for higher positions would conflict with other priorities in their life. And I just see that so true. The quote they use in the research, I just thought about it like, what would my life look like? And what would I have to sacrifice to get where she is? And I didn't want to do it. And I work with a lot of mums that are like, they're on the partner track and they're like, and they look up, or they're on the CEO track or the GM track, and they go, I don't want to do that. Like, is that how you have to do it? So I think these power of role models of doing GM roles differently, of doing C-suite roles differently, partnership differently is so important. The second barrier was caregiving. New Zealand is the most expensive country in the OECD for daycare. If you're paying daycare in Australia, it's something like 35% of your take-home income for a couple with 2 children. That's a lot. Caregiving. Since 2019 in the States, the number of women that report caregiving as a factor that holds them back professionally has increased from 10% to 26%. It reminds me of something I say, and if you work with me or you follow me on Instagram, you will know I'm full of lots of sayings. And one of my sayings is that I feel like we've told women they can break into the boardroom, but we haven't told men they can break into the home. And, you know, I want to toku all the men in this room, but men are important. We need to link arms with men. It's why I run a whole lot of programs for dads in corporates now, because dads need the freedom to be an active caregiver, because there's so much to give to be that. And it's going to enable women to take their place in the world. I'm going to get into it. I just really want to say that, you know, it's not the fault of anyone in this room that we're here, because it's the soup we're all swimming in. So bring your curious mind to this work. Bring an open mind. It's not a zero-sum game. Women advancing does not mean men falling. And I think we just all need to be curious, because this stuff is really hard. First of all, I want to introduce Steve Jurkovich. Steve is the CEO of Kiwibank. He joined Kiwibank in July 2018. With over 20 years of banking experience in Australia and New Zealand, Steve's career to date has included senior and executive leadership positions with accountabilities across retail, corporate, commercial, rural banking and legal with New Zealand's largest banks. He's a director of the Banking Ombudsman Scheme and a former chair of the New Zealand Bankers Association during the COVID pandemic. He's also a founding trustee of the Tanya Dalton Foundation, whose purpose is to help young women achieve their epic potential, which is a great foundation. And the other thing he didn't put on his bio is he was my star guest on my podcast last year. It was all about making space for dads. If you want to hear about Steve's generous and courageous stories about being a working dad, please go and listen. Welcome. Thank you, Steve, for coming. Our next panellist is Marika Eastwick-Field. Marika has been on the Russell McVeagh board for the last 3 years. She is co-chair of the firm's D&I committee and has been a partner at the firm since 2016. Marika specialises in commercial litigation, focusing on complex commercial disputes. Her expertise spans contentious and advisory roles in insurance, mergers and acquisitions, disputes, property and leasing disputes, capital markets and financial services and company law. Don't mess with her. Welcome, Marika. And Mika Austin, our final panellist is Mika Austin, an experienced senior executive with over 10 years experience as General Manager of People and Culture at the Guardians of New Zealand Superannuation, the New Zealand Super Fund. Prior to joining the fund, Mika was a commercial litigator for 12 years, specialising in complex banking, antitrust and tax avoidance cases at a top-tier corporate law firm and at the Financial Services Authority in London. She also, don't mess with her. The other thing that Mika did not put on her bio, but I'm going to tell you, is she is one of the creative geniuses behind a musical called HR the Musical. It was at the Q Theatre a couple of years ago. You will cry laughing. If you've ever been to an all-hands meeting or had to deal with scope creep or anything, you need to go and see this. She's doing version 2, HR the Musical 2 in December. Book the tickets. That's all I'm saying. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to kick us off with, I'm going to ask Steve first. You know, The modern workplace wasn't built with women in mind. And when we talk about structural barriers, can you think about a structural barrier you identified in your organisation that was holding women back and how you went about dismantling it? What's been your experience? What have you learnt about a structural barrier that's holding women back?
Unfortunately, it's a really long list, isn't it? So I think one of the things that we've spoken about previously, like there's a lot of policy and things you can do, but ultimately, some of the worst situations I sort of see is the really, actionable choices that leaders can make to normalise the situation. I often think it comes down to things like the sort of that weird and very, very toxic sort of hairy eyeball when people are coming in, because they've got other things that they need to do. So I think those are the sort of, I think there's lots of things you can do around making sure that the frameworks are right. But ultimately, I think it comes down much more to, how do you behave? What are the choices leaders make? It's as weird as things like scheduling meetings that obviously make it difficult for people who are needing to be more flexible when they arrive. So the congratulations to everyone that books the 8:30 meeting. That makes it really difficult for everyone.
Yeah.
And all those sorts of things. So I think...
And they're tut-tussing you when you arrive.
And that's right. And, I think there was a lot to be said for the, leaving and arriving noisily and making sure that people can see that. Certainly... when I think about, one of the people that's had a huge influence in my career, Barbara, as my previous CE in my previous role, she'd always talked about not managing your time, managing your energy, and was, really, really conscious about the way that she would make things happen at particular times so that everyone could feel included. So, unfortunately, I guess it's not breathtaking in terms of the insight, but I do think there's a lot that leaders can do around making sure that people do feel welcome, that they do feel like they belong, that, you're making space for people, that, the policies accommodate those sorts of things.
Little things can have a big impact, right? I know one of the things when we talked briefly before around these little things, I really love that story that you shared with me about noticing what happened to a person who started at 9:30 in the morning. Can you share that story?
Yeah, I think the real difficulty is, I think, when it comes down to situations where people are, everything is made, it just makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And so the choices that if you, instead of making it difficult, how can you make it easy? And you can see when people are coming into the workplace, particularly if you work in activity-based working, so you don't have a desk, you don't have a fixed place that you come and sit. You see team members come in, they can't sit with their teams, or there's, space hasn't been held for them, or meetings aren't arranged so that they can, fully participate. And I think that creates, a lack of confidence, a lack of belonging, and all those things hold people back. And so I think, it's just about making choices that allow people to feel like they belong and feel like they fit.
Absolutely. If you feel like you're kind of the square peg in the round hole, you don't feel welcome, you don't feel needed, and it makes a difference to how you show up in meetings, how you show up in promotions. So thank you for that, Steve. What about you, Marika? What's been a structural barrier that you've seen, and what have you tried to do to smash it?
Similar comments to Steve around, gosh, there's so many barriers, aren't there? And, my pet peeve actually is school hours. School hours are really not made for two working parents. But I think, one of the things that we've really been focused on as an organisation is, and talking about some of that research around, motherhood and having children and taking time out of work being one of the barriers for women, is to make that process as easy as possible through, extending leave entitlements, but more importantly, I think really being active around managing how we stay in contact with women while they are on leave, and then a real wraparound service when they come back into the workforce, to make sure that, they step back into those client relationships, to those, career enhancing work streams, that there's sort of mentorship and support available, and emergency nanny services, which I took advantage of a lot. And I'm happy to say that despite the conduct of one of my children, the organisations are still on our list. But, that's because I think societally and sort of, biologically, I suppose, a lot of the childcare does fall to women. And, even though, again, my gripe about schools, even though both my husband and I are listed as contacts, they always call me. Even when it's my husband that signed up to go to the school trip, say, "Dear Marika, is your husband coming?" I have no idea. But that sort of often, you get the call that you need to go and pick up your child, or they're sick and you need to stay at home. So we've really tried to sort of provide a service that we pay for, obviously, where if, normal childcare arrangements fall through, that there's an emergency nanny service available there, just to help, on that home front.
I bet you're going to get a lot of job applications now.
So, those are some of the small things. If there were a silver bullet, I'm sure everyone would have deployed it by now. So we sort of think of it as being lots and lots of little things like that we can kind of do to not entirely alleviate, but at least, help along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I think, looking at the experience of what it is to be a woman at work and trying to see, well, as an employer, what can I do to put a care wrap around that? So the idea that you had around, while people are on leave, if they're on parental leave, for example, I know that's a small part, how do we keep them involved? How do we keep them informed? And I think that's a really important thing. I know a lot of employers will hold like quarterly kind of update sessions for everyone who's on leave or out of the business. And I think it's really important because, again, I think it's a real shock. I know parental leave is not relevant for everyone, but what I see for people is that when you go on parental leave, it is incredibly shocking to be out of a business that you might have worked in for 20 years or to be out of a career that you might have been in for 20 years. And you begin to think, who even am I? And so it's really important if our employers like, we see you, we still value you. If you would like updates from work, this is how we want to do them. How do you want to do it? So I think that's really important. And the emergency nanny, that seems very important. I do know in the US, during pandemic, they used to hire night nannies for people. Who would like a night nanny from work? Register here. Mika, what about you? What's been your experience in breaking down structural barriers?
Yeah, well, I'd certainly echo the comments that both of you have made about, where aren't there structural barriers for a start, but also trying to think really holistically about what are lots of little things that we can do rather than hoping for some kind of big bang that's going to solve everything. So, we've certainly tried to think about a really systemic approach to, as you say, that entire career life cycle for not only women but all of our staff. Actually, if we're going to do something for our women, we'll be doing the same thing for our men, and as you said earlier, that kind of rising tide lifts all boats. So right from when you're at university, how are we looking to get women looking to come into a career in finance? If that feels scary to you, maybe you might be in law and we can bring you into our organisation that way and then kind of show you the shiny thing on the investment side and get you interested as you grow your career. Let's put lots and lots of training in place. Let's really give you opportunities when you're in the business to sit in another team and shadow what those people might be doing. And it's okay, you don't have to produce something or be the best person in the room or know all the answers, but actually just kind of learning what others do and going, oh, actually it wasn't such a mystery after all, or I could see myself doing that. Oh, and by the way, now I've got relationships here. So now I feel I could go and talk to that person in that team that previously felt scary to me about maybe this is a direction that I could take my career. When you're designing roles, what does that job description look like? Is it something that will encourage women to come into the workforce? I loved the discussion about equal pay. This is just one of my absolute, passion projects. Basic starting point, equal pay for equal work. If you do not have that, you need to sort that out today. It is not up to your female employees to subsidise your business. You need to fix that today. And then the bigger problem of, as the Minister touched on, women tending to be in lower paid roles. I'm in HR, that's that fuzzy, nice to have people thing that all the ladies do. Firstly, let's make sure we've got equal gender representation in HR just as much as we do in investments. Where are my men? And now, where are the women in investments? When I started at the fund 12 years ago, we had a third of our staff were women. We're now up to 50% women. 22% of our staff were women in the investments function. It's now 44% in the investments function. So you need to look at all of these little things to make these small differences at each point along the way, and gradually, the tide will turn.
Mm-hmm. Amazing results. Put that on your LinkedIn, won't you? That's incredible. I think it's annoying when the answer is lots of little things, but I think it's like everything we do as leaders is going to make a big difference. What about a question for you? Let's start with you, Marika. When it comes to women's leadership and advancing women through the organisation into GMs, partners, C-suite roles, what have you seen that works? And talk to us about whether or not you think that it's a mentoring thing, whether it's a sponsorship thing, whether it's leadership courses. What is it that you think can deliver a difference to getting more women into the top jobs?
Easy question.
I know. I'm good at the easy questions.
Again, I think the response is lots of little things, but I suppose there's sort of a couple of things that I think of as being really important. One of them is actually just representation and kind of demonstrating that that is a career pathway available for people. And we've been very, very focused in terms of, for example, our board of management to, as much as possible, have an equal split of men and women, and just sort of demonstrate that as a career path, and sort of have leaders out there actually talking about what they do and what their experiences have been, and sometimes this sort of stuff sounds a little bit naff, but career panels, like talking about people's pathways. And I think for a lot of our women, it's been quite surprising for them to learn that, we didn't, as partners, sort of wake up, when we're kids and think, I'm going to be a partner and this is all I'm going to do. And I got there and, that we had some sort of special pathway, that actually everyone took these kind of winding ways through into their leadership positions, and got encouraged by a lot of supportive men and women along the way in that journey. So I think, part of it is actually just demonstrating that as a career path. I am often told, can you make it look a bit more fun? I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I love my job. I think it's very fun. So I need to just get better at making that more evident, apparently. But look, the other thing is, and mentorship is great. I think that, for women who have people that they can talk to about, how they might go about things, how they might tackle hard discussions, and kind of give them a bit of a nudge. Awesome. But I actually think the thing that really moves the dial is having champions in the organisation. Men and women, but people who are out there saying, this person must be a partner. I don't care what is standing in the way. We're going to remove all of those obstacles and bring that person up.
Yes,
and frankly, that is the thing that really, I think, moves the needle for us. You can mentor and coach and tell women, just be more confident, and you can do this, and you're great. But actually, that's fine. That sort of creates the opportunity. But I think in terms of actually making change and bringing people through into leadership positions, you just need people to say, I'm going to make this happen.
Yep. Totally agree. If you don't follow Cindy Gallop on LinkedIn or Insta, you should, because she's a New York ad woman, and she says, don't empower me, Pay me. But she says women don't need mentors, they need champions. Exactly. And I know that all the panelists share this view. You need someone who says your name in a room and says, appoint Annabelle to that role. And then work with Annabelle to make that work. Because you got to believe in them, I think. So I love that. I love that. Mika, what's your view on leadership, women in leadership? How do we get more?
Well, again, maybe I can give a practical example that one of the things that we do, and I'm sure a lot of the businesses in this room will do this when you're looking at your succession planning and so on and your key roles, if you don't have a 50-50 split of men and women on your kind of long list, go back and find some more. And even if they seem random or unlikely, that's okay. Get them on the list and start talking to them, and then say, actually, we're not promising you this job, but is this the sort of thing that you would be interested in doing? And they might never have thought of it. And then once you've planted that seed and they think, actually, yeah, that might be the sort of thing I'd be interested in doing in 6 years' time, great. Now let's do something about getting there and closing that gap. And in 5 years' time, or in 1 year's time, let's look and say, okay, what are we doing this year? Because now we've got 5 years left and we've got to chip away at this thing and actually practically move things along. So by the time the role comes up in 6 years' time, they're ready to go. And they're still going to have to prove themselves, and there'll still be men on the list, and the man might still get the job. But you know what? At least they're in the mix, and they might not otherwise have been.
I love that. I love that. I know Steve's amping to get in, and I just want to add to that, this whole I'm not ready thing, what my approach for that when I work with people who are like, well, I'm not, I don't want to get a bigger job because I'm not ready, and also it's too stressful. What I just say to people, if you're one of those people, is you're probably already giving 120% to your job right now. Why don't you just get paid more for it? Do you know what I mean? Like, I never see people giving less because you're getting paid less. Your effort is not elastic, right? So if you don't think you're ready and you don't want the stress, have a think about how much stress you're under now. Because we actually need women to earn more money. Because if you don't know, the people running the world right now have a lot of money, and we need to arm ourselves with money. So if you're not ready, just talk to someone who knows you are. Steve, what's your view, my friend?
Well, no one's ever ready, right? That's
No.
the point. So, I mean, unless you're wildly overconfident, I think everyone, when they're sitting thinking about that job, is actually the point that they usually in their mind is, well, I'm not ready for it, but actually you almost always are.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, I mean, because given that most and a lot of us work in financial services, I'm be a little bit contrarian, but you sort of the nudge along and do a lot of little things obviously makes sense. But if you put your hand up, is anyone here either working on a backlog or got a pipeline in their business? Yep, that's a big surprise, right? So one of the ways I would think about it a little bit differently is if you work in financial services, you've got a pipeline, and so you've got people that are prospects, and then you're working with them, and you're hoping that they, one day they're going to join your business. And every single person is dealing with that every single day. And so, typically that's some sort of funnel, which is, hey, I met this person at the breakfast. They seem like they might be interested in moving to Kiwibank. I'll go and talk to Carly, give Carly a bit of an idea about the work that we do and why we would be a good mix for her. Oh, now she's a prospect. Okay, she's a prospect. We're going to keep working on that. We're going to drag her through to the next stage, hopefully, where, we put a proposal in front of her. She looks at the proposal. She thinks, it's pretty good, but I'm happy with my incumbent. I keep working on it. One day she wakes up and she thinks, actually, maybe I'll make the move. So, that is every single day we're doing that. And so I wonder if you thought about that in terms of your, gender pay gaps and those sorts of things. If you're a little bit more unreasonable and just said, look, we're going to work on this like it's a crisis. We're going to work on this like it's a pipeline. Then you would say, like, for instance, for us, we have got a weakness in our top tiers of leadership in terms of gender. So if you acknowledge that that's a crisis, just like, cybersecurity or anything else you do, you get a plan, you make sure you got the right resources, you get, technical support or outside expertise where you need it, and you just try and fix it. So if you do the same thing in that situation, I think you would say, like, for instance, we have a huge amount of amazing, impactful leaders that are females in our branch network. So one way to say that is a problem, which is we haven't been able to support enough women to make the next step to regional leadership. Well, the other way to think about it is awesome pipeline.
Yep.
What are we going to do about it? And if you think about pipeline management, you have to stage interventions.
Yep.
That's the only way that things move forward. And so I think if you sort of reframe the way you think about it and just say to leaders, my boss would come and see me and say, when I was running regional sales leadership, saying, how's the pipeline? Oh, good. Yeah, well, how come you're not doing any deals? Well, it's hard and economy and all that good stuff that I've got. And they would just say, well, yeah, it's fascinating. Maybe I should get someone that can do the job. And so then I would say, well, actually, here's when we're working. Can you come along and, can you come and do the visit with me? Can you see what I'm not doing right? All those sorts of things. So I think if you're a bit more unreasonable about how you expect people to make progress on the pipeline, you'd have a very different conversation, right? Because none of you as sales leaders are going to be able to say, oh, actually, we haven't got any prospects, we can't drag anyone through. And so I think if you do that and say same thing, same energy, same intervention, same coaching, same specific actions and follow up and all those things, you get different outcomes.
Love it. Unreasonable expectations. Treating it like a pipeline. I mean, when I hear you talk that back, it's about lengthening the runway. Like, it's not every 2 months going, what are we going to do? It's like having a plan. So I really love that. I've got one more question. This is a question that's very dear to my heart. I said to the guys, I'm only doing this if I can ask this question because it's important. Hee Jung Chung, who is the director of King's College London Global Institute for Women's Leadership, has said recently, more radical change is needed when it comes to redesigning work. We need to completely shatter the idea that full-time work has to be 40 hours. A 30-hour work week would make it possible for more women to go into leadership. I want to start with Mika, and I guess the question is, what's been your experience in redesigning work so that it can be career building but completed in reduced hours? Yeah, what's your view on that?
I love this so much. I mean, this is the lived experience of many of us, I'm sure. Firstly, we just know that you can. So, how do you do it? Start with how you're designing the job. What does this job actually need to do? When does it need to be done? There are very few jobs where you must sit in a specific place and be available in that spot from 8:30 to 5:30 Monday to Friday. Very, very few jobs. I'd say there's one of those in our business and one person does not have to do that job. You could have multiple people doing it. So literally every single job we've got, we could design in a way that does not need to be done 40 hours a week. Or if it does, it doesn't have to be done between 8:30 and 5:30, and it certainly doesn't have to be done at a specific desk. So what actually does this job need to do, truly, to deliver for the business? Then how can you condense hours? Could you share it between two people? Could you do it Monday to Thursday and, have a long day on Thursday and have the day off on Friday? I mean, there's so many different ways you can do it. I love the thing about leaving loudly. I am going to my kids' thing. You have no idea what work I was going to be doing today anyway, but I promise you it will be done. Like, come and talk to me if something isn't being done. That conversation has never happened because it's always delivered. We all know our responsibilities. We hire good people. And if on that very, very rare occasion there is somebody who really isn't delivering, then fine, you deal with that. That's an easy thing to do. But just be creative, move out of the box. Then when you're thinking about, well, who can do this job? Again, do you actually have to have a BCom? Probably not, And if you do, great. But, really be creative about it. And then, think about the support networks that are in place for people. How can you be helped? And again, this is not about starting from the starting point of how can I make this work for women? This is just how can I make this work for people? You'll find that your men embrace this as much as your women do. we have flexible work. We've got just as many men doing it. Some of them are doing it for childcare reasons. One of them's doing it because he really likes yoga, and that's one of the things he does. But he does his job in the other 4 days of the week, and the fifth day he's doing headstands. I don't know, but so there's lots of different ways to think about this, and really test yourself on what are the things that really can't be changed, and I bet you there's very few of them.
Emma, can I just say, there's a bit of a watch out for me in the sense that what I see is often that situation with the 30-hour example that you gave is actually a pretty shitty deal, because the expectations end up being 4.5 days getting paid for.
Yes.
I think that's the real watch out for me, which is, I sort of see it in this situation with one of the team members that works with me closely. She works 4 days a week, but I see our board and governors schedule things on Friday, which is the day she isn't working. It's like, well, it's pretty shit. She's not getting paid for it. So how about we don't give and don't set expectations that someone who's not working that day ends up with timelines or meetings that work that way.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've done in the past is offer that person 4.5 days pay, because the work often creeps in, but just make sure that in this example, said to her, don't ever tell anyone that you're getting 4.5 days. Just, you get 4.5 days, but you always say to everyone it's 4 days, because it just wasn't fair.
Yeah.
Like she's working way more hours than that. And I find that anyone that takes on that, typically to your point, is working way more than that. And that's just a really bad deal.
Yeah.
And so giving people confidence to say, well, actually, this isn't really working out for me that way, or, the work creeps into 4 3/4 days that you're getting paid for is kind of manifesting itself in the worst possible way. So all up for flexibility, just make sure that it's fair flexibility and that people don't then go, oh, we'll have our team meeting on Friday at 10 o'clock. So, that's the day I don't work.
Totally.
Yeah.
Love it.
Can I just add one thing to that? I completely agree. And back in my lawyer days, I used to work part-time, and I had little kids at home. And this absolutely was not an expectation put on me by the firm, but one that I put on myself. Was like, my clients mustn't know that I'm part-time, because then I won't be taken seriously or whatever. So the first thing I did when I switched out of law and became a client of the law firms was I said to my legal providers, give me your part-time lawyers and tell them that I know they are part-time. Tell me what days they don't work. As a client, I can support this. And if really and truly I must have that advice on Thursday night, by Friday morning, I will let you know, and you can put whoever is the right lawyer on that case for me. But I bet you that's going to be very rare, and I don't think it's ever happened. And I will deal with my lawyer or whoever the professional services provider may be in this specific case on the days that they're working, and it's fine. So you can actually support it in other businesses as well, in how you're asking them to show up for you.
I love that. Get your clients on board, right? So important. Marika.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because one of my points was going to be actually having discussions, as a lawyer and a service provider with clients about what we're managing in terms of people's days in the office, wherever that office might be, and not. Since the days that you were in our firm, things have changed a lot. Like we have these awesome discussions with clients who are themselves working, different days or different times of days, working flexibly, and really, really delighted actually to have discussions with us about, how our lawyers are doing that and how we can sort of work together to make sure that things still get done in the timeframes that they need to be done. And yes, from time to time, there will be something that's really urgent that, you need to log in on your day with family or whatever it might be. But actually, as Mika says, those instances are pretty rare if you manage it well. And as someone who supervises work, I'm always really conscious about having discussions with clients about what are the timing expectations, how can we manage it, how can we make sure we deliver while still supporting both our people and our clients' people to be able to work the days that they've arranged to work. The other point, I suppose, just touching on flexibility, I think in many respects, COVID did us a massive favour on that front, because I think there were definitely some more progressive people, I'd like to think, within our organisation who were very supportive of flexibility and people working from home or slightly different hours or whatever it might be. And then, the reality was that there was a portion of our firm that needed to be brought along a journey in terms of that being, something that was actually possible and worked for us as an organisation. And, COVID obviously, had lots of sort of horrendous implications, but actually one of the silver linings for us is we were suddenly thrust, and whenever it was, March, April 2020, into a situation where we all had to work from home. And it worked. We could do it. People could log in. People could still get their work done. And, a lot of us were juggling childcare as well. Wasn't that a fun time? But, having to sort of do the schooling for our children and then log in to do this. And it was all a bit of a chaotic time. But, actually through that, we learned that, it was possible for everyone's job still to get done, working from home, working at weird hours, finding different ways to communicate. That didn't mean you had to be in the office and kind of, in your seat and turning up to these in-person meetings. So I think, we've sort of carried through, and there's lots of advantages obviously to sort of being, together in person and team building and that sort of thing, which we're also trying to encourage. But actually we've carried through some of those learnings that we had from those horrible lockdown times that I think have been really helpful as well. That it's not the case that if someone's not at their desk at a particular time that the work won't get done. It just might be being done somewhere else or at some other time.
Yes, Steve.
I think I might have shared this with you when we talked about it previously, but the one of the things that that I was at the brunt of was the sort of weird things that go on at work about sort of championing the long hours that people do and those sorts of things. I might share it with you. But once upon a time, I was really priding myself on the length of hours I would do, much to my embarrassment now. And my boss came along and said, can I have a word with you? And said, yeah, sure. And I thought she was going to, give me a big shoulder pat about all these big hours I was doing. And she was like, is this job too big for you? And I was like, right, well, that's not kind of what I expected. And she was like, because I'm kind of worried that you can't get the job done in the hours that we pay you for.
Wow.
And I was like, right. And she's like, but if it is too much, it's fine to put your hand up and say, this thing's too big for me. And, we can get people to help you and stuff like that. And I was like, right, okay. So the point that she was making, obviously, at that time was, I think is a pretty good one as well, which is, what's the sort of habits and rituals and conversations that go on that end up weirdly celebrating that versus the opposite, which is, I certainly know for the people that are the primary caregivers in our business, they just haven't got time to faff around.
Yeah.
And, one of them's here today, and Nicola, and I'll call her out as well, which is, one of her absolute superpowers is I don't want to clack around. I've got things to do, so I'm going to get them done. Yeah. And hallelujah to that, So what I do see is, people sort of hanging around, kind of looking busy versus actually I'm going to get stuff done, and now I've got it done, I can go because I've got to go and do other things. And so, I'd certainly say that was a lesson learned for me around thinking that one thing was going to be celebrated and recognising that the leaders in the organisation were like, that's not the way we want things to be. So, by the way, everyone that sees you staying thinks they have to stay.
Totally. Rather
than actually, you don't have to stay if you're done, and great, and we should celebrate that.
Totally. Amazing. COVID was a wrecking ball to this idea that you mess around when you're at home, right? So I love that. And then I love that, Steve, it's what people are watching us. People are watching us as leaders and what leadership is, and that makes a big difference. I just want to acknowledge Steve's point around people that are working 4 days a week and actually doing more than 4 days and what as a leader we can do about that. I think it's very important to notice what is actually happening, right? And I think it's a big role for men. Notice whether someone is doing more hours. And the same as if you're in a heterosexual relationship, notice stuff at home. Noticing, for me, is how we change this. Notice that the broccoli's going off in the fridge. Notice that the person who works 4 days a week is often at the Friday team meeting and do something about it. Noticing is important.
Thank you. Kari Jones from the Financial Markets Authority. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. I don't have children. This conversation feels really irrelevant to me. Okay. And so what is relevant to us is as we get older, we all go through something called the menopause. And I think that's a piece of the conversation that's been completely left out today. We're talking about women as they come into higher, as they start to go into very senior roles, start to hit a prolonged period of change in their lives that can be up to 10 years of hormonal change. I haven't had children, and I said that that's a very short period of time, but something that will affect everyone. Oh, the women in the room, everyone in this room will be around change around the menopause, and I think we've lost that in this conversation about how women, as they get older, remain relevant and continue to show and demonstrate their relevance as they get older as well. So I'd really like to see if we can have that part of the conversation today.
That's good call, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fabulous point. I mean, I pick up on one point is that it does impact everyone, right? Because we're teammates of people in that situation as well. So in our lunch and learn activities, and Nikki, who led the conversation in our workplace in one of the lunch and learns, is, I think, by far the most engaged session we've had, which was around talking about menopause. And so, we had hundreds and hundreds of people in that online conversation. It was one of the richest and best conversations I think we've had in our workplace. Man, there was some super confronting conversations around, some of our team members saying, because of the change that they were going through, I no longer feel confident to present in case I have a moment where I can't remember what I was going to say. And so, making sure that you create a situation which is, hey, this is not a driver's test. You're presenting with friends and teammates who support you. If you need to stop and do something, that's fine. It's and how do we make that situation work better? So I think it is a super important point. And just getting the conversation going and having it open and people raising things, some of our team members talking about, in their household, what that had meant around their relationships and what it meant for their relationships and work, opened heaps of eyes to the situation. I think created some safety around people wanting to have the conversation. So if you haven't had that conversation in your workplace, I just encourage you that it's such a massive opportunity to sort of open up that conversation and work out, is there things you can do differently? Is there things that we're doing unconsciously that are creating issues? That even people feeling safe to have the conversation was super important. And so, it's a great call out. And if you haven't done it, I just really encourage you to do that. And I'd certainly push, Nikki as a professional that's working in that area. By the way, don't ask her to do it for free, which is, kind of like I've seen her talk about the fact that people, asking her to come and do what she does for a job for nothing. So that's pretty weird as well. So, but she does a fabulous job and she creates a really great conversation, which is still an ongoing one for us and still much more to do, but it's a great call out.
Other guys want to chip on that?
No, thank you for calling that out as well. I think it's probably fair to say that, in our firm, we've started having some of those discussions about what menopause means for women and how we sort of help to equip people all throughout the organisation to kind of deal with it and support women through. I think for me, actually just starting some of those conversations is kind of, obviously right at the bottom of where we need to be, but something that, I've noticed more and more, that actually people are being open about talking about how it's manifesting for them. We had speakers in the other day, and I think it's just normalizing some of the discussions as well. And as I said, really baby steps. And I appreciate that, we have a lot further to go on that journey. And thank you for raising it. But yeah, obviously a really important topic for us to think about as well.
And thank you for raising the question as well. We have touched on it very lightly now. Thank you. I do know one of my clients, I work with a very large insurance company, and they also held a team session on menopause. It was their biggest attendance for the entire year. We have to start these conversations. They can be kind of awkward, but we just have to, all the good stuff is awkward, by the way. So I think we need to start it. Thank you very much to Steve, Marika and Mika. They all gave up their time. They have volunteered. Thank you very much for being here.